A little less than 1 year ago, I decided to put out my most successful videos that I will acknowledge, focusing on me saying what I think the best and worst unit in every Fire Emblem game is. Now, are these objective? No. But that's not to say I was picking things at random. I took units who, from both my experience and comparing stats, growths, and other factors from the wiki, either belong in the trash or the Smithsonian. And people had opinions on my opinions. Now, I want to say that for the most part, I didn't receive any real hate. Some people called my takes stupid or that they were the worst takes they've ever seen, but I'm not going to cry over that. I think the worst I got was some people saying that these felt phoned in or that I was just trying to be different and controversial, which, for the most part, I wasn't. But I feel like it's a good time to review these takes I had, after reading through many comments, and deciding once and for all if my takes are hot trash, or the hottest new stars, sung by kids for kids. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is a funky game with funky mechanics, and replaying this game for the review is showing me just how different the game can treat different people. This segment will focus on my worst take, since no one really contested Martha Hardin being the best. Now, the main reason why people think Daros isn't the worst unit is because of two factors: the Devil Axe and Ballistician units. Now, the Devil Axe sounds impressive, boasting as much might or more than the legendary Gradius and Mercurius, but it comes at a cost, as the weapon has a luck % chance to backfire, and instead of hitting the mage for 24 damage, instead hitting Daros for 24. Since in this game the backfire doesn't compare your attack to your defense, it just deals the damage you were supposed to deal to yourself, which, under this math, would one-shot Daros. Whether or not it will backfire depends on the math: 21% minus luck, which, since Daros starts as an enemy, his luck stat is random, meaning that while he can, as far as I know, start with as low as a 12% chance to activate it, it could also have a 21% chance to activate. Plus, there's only 2 in the game for a total of 18 swings, so I don't think this matters that much. But the bigger error people have is picking him over Jake and Beck because they're ballisticians, which suck. Unlike what we know them as with 3 to 10 range, they're basically just another flavor of archers, except even slower, but much tankier. And not all their weapons are effective against flyers. But I'm going to defend them just a tad, because they're archers, and this game loves throwing Draco Knights at you. And considering most of the time they're going to be pretty tanky and relatively fast, I can see a reason why you'd deploy Jake or Beck to deal with annoying Draco Knights. The Ballisticians deal 40 or 41 damage to a Draco Knight, subtracting the class defense of 14, means you're dealing 26 or 27 damage, enough to remove a dangerous threat without much hassle. Meanwhile, even with the Devil Axe, Daros only deals 12 damage that might get backfired towards him, and considering his speed stat, there's no way he's not getting doubled. Meanwhile, Jake and Beck would only get doubled if they were fighting an enemy with a javelin or a Levin sword. I do think that outside of dealing with Draco Knights, Jake and Beck suck, but to say that they're worse than Daros isn't accurate since, in my opinion, they can help deal with the most annoying unit in the game, and keep your weaker units safe when bunkering down. Now this is probably my most controversial take. A lot of people say that Sonya is far from the best unit, and that picking up Dean requires losing Sonya matters not at all. So to try to see if everyone was right, I went back and played Gaiden through all over again. And you know what? She's not the best. But she's still an amazing unit. Celica's enemies are primarily defense focused, so having a fast mage who can land a ton of crits is incredibly valuable, and her ability to obliterate enemies from afar is super nice, especially once she gets the mage ring. Her only real flaw is that she's incredibly slowed by the poison fog, unlike the White Wings, which, in my opinion, Katria is the best. All 3 White Wings are incredibly good, what with their great speed, pretty good stats overall, and the promotion making them effective against monsters, of which Celica's final act has quite a lot, but Katria's mix of strength defense, combined with pretty good growths, makes her stand out the best. They're all good, don't get me wrong, and I almost picked Alm, but Alm stumbles a bit near the end of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 3 when there's no good weapons for him, and the Levin sword is most likely on another character. Meanwhile, Katria and Paula are fantastic no matter what part you're at. Katria's item lets her snowball by doubling all stat gains and giving her a constant heal, and while I would still put Sonya in my top 5, Katria I think takes the slot as the best. As for the worst, yeah, it's not Dean. I'm sorry for saying that. Now that I think that Sonya isn't the best, picking him isn't the worst idea, but he's still just okay, and in Gaiden at least, Dread Fighters aren't absolutely necessary like they are in Echoes. As for who the real worst unit is, I saw some people raise some good ideas, mostly Mycen and Noma, but to be honest, Mycen does his job of getting punched in the face in the final act, and Noma's spell list being entirely available right from the get-go does have some value. So I think I'm going to give it to Valbar. Bowie's defenses are good enough to act as a tank for Celica's army, especially once you grab the leather shield. He's incredibly slow in a game where being incredibly slow is terrible. He's got no range outside of the javelin Pala has, and that's better used on Pala. And outside of getting punched in the face, he's got no real pros, since his high strength is high at first, but it falls off a lot faster than you'd expect. So yeah, going forward, Catre is uber good, Valbar is a trash can. Mystery of the Emblem is one of the best games in the series if you like terrible units. The Star Sphere and Star Shards allow you to make a unit as insane as you'd like, so that's why picking a character as the worst was kind of hard. If you'd like, using these 4 shards, you can get a 90% strength, 60% defense, 20% skill, and 10% bonus to your speed growths, which can help snowball you into a killing machine. Also, minus 10 weapon level and luck, but who cares about those? That's why I think that Samuel isn't the worst, because the Star Shards can make him into a beast if you really like that grin of his. I think that a worse unit, now that I'm thinking about it more, is a unit that doesn't have time to grow, and that's Roche. You may say, Cal, what about Midia, who joins 1 chapter later and probably can't do anything in said chapter? Well, first, you could rescue her, and secondly, not only does Midia mog Roche in every single stat outside of HP, and has about equal growths, but this late in the game, Roche and Midia are going to mostly be using swords, and in that regard, Roche needs at least 4 levels dumped into to wield either the Meisterschwert or the Mercurius, which Midia can use right out the gate, and unless he got 3 points of strength during said 4 levels, Midia would be using it just as, if not better than him. Sure, he has the latter half of Chapter 19 and Chapter 20 to use the Star Sphere, while Midia only has Chapter 20, assuming they rescued her. The biggest flaw is that Roche is a man, which means he can't use the Lady Blade, an accurate, powerful blade which is effective against the dozens of barbarians the endgame throws at you. Even if you wanted to argue that the clerics in the endgame are worse, I disagree because they can do their job perfectly of keeping your actual units safe and sound, since they can all wield every staff in the game that you might need, like Physic or Fortify, and 2 of them, Lena and Elise, only need 1 arm scroll to wield the Anu staff, giving another action to every single unit in your army, including your dancer. So that alone makes it so that these 2 are far from bad. And the recovery potential makes the others just a tad better than Roche. Oh, and Pala's still the best. That's right, I'm defending my take. What are you gonna do about it? Everyone and their mothers said that Ardent is worse than Nisha. But you know what? I'm going to oppose that, because in my opinion, a horse is all that Nisha has on Ardent. And while that's amazing, Ardent comes in clutch in quite a few locations. First, stat-wise. The only stats that matter here, really, are HP, strength, and defense, because skill and luck only matter when things go wrong, and you blame them for their poor growths, when otherwise you wouldn't notice. Speed, it doesn't matter, because there's like 9 Myrmidons in Sigurd's entire quest, and I think fewer bow fighters. Getting doubled is just not a threat, and they both have trash resistance. Out of the gate, Ardent beats Nisha in all 3 categories, even having better HP and strength growths, though they share a defense growth. Nisha has access to lances over Ardent, but most of the time he's going to be using swords outside of javelins, and there's only 2 of them which are better used on higher priority units, like Aranis, Finn, or Sigurd. Nisha will have a slight damage boost increase over Ardent thanks to starting with a steel sword, but once the balls get rolling, Ardent will be dealing more damage, and thanks to Vantage, might even be able to sneak in a kill when he gets tagged. And sure, Nisha can do the same with charge and critical, but I've seen charge get a unit killed more times than I can count, and it's something I've seen complain about a ton over the years. But Cal, Ardent can't be anywhere! But have you ever considered that for first-time players, or even someone on a second playthrough, they're not going to go for extreme speed stats like a ranked run? If you still don't believe me and think there's nowhere to use Ardent, allow me to show you images to the contrary. The bridge in Prologue, the woods in Chapter 1, the choke point in Chapter 2, the looser choke point in Chapter 2, Chagall's base in Chapter 3, the pirate onslaught in Chapter 3, That's 6 whole places where the player can place Arden and let him get punched by enemies, keeping your units safe, and getting him plenty of experience. Plus, unlike Nisha, Arden doesn't have to worry about critical hits, since while there's a couple mini-bosses that use Horse Slayers, not a single enemy in the entire game uses an Armor Slayer, as far as I'm aware. And if you can get enough XP onto him to promote, he gets access to A-rank swords, lances, axes, and bows, meaning anything your allies aren't using because they're focusing other weapons or are dead, can be used by him to make him more versatile. And unlike Nisha, whose promotion offers him not a whole lot, Arden gets Big Shield, giving him a minimum 20% chance to entirely invalidate an incoming attack. Now that's not to say he's amazing, but god no, he's pretty trash overall. There's still a solid reason to use him, while, in my opinion, Nisha just doesn't have the sauce. Also, once again, Sigurd clears no diff. Okay, before we get into this, guys, I am 90% sure I said back then, I am not looking at the best paired unit. I was looking at the best unit, period. Because yes, Lewin Arthur is awesome. Getting Forsetti super early is game-breaking, and putting it on a horse is awesome. But remember, just as easily, someone could make a Claude Arthur in order to bump Tina's staff rank up to A, giving her access to Fortify and Rescue for whatever strategy they think they need, and thus, other than Wrath from his mom and really good resistance, he's got nothing. Hence why I made Ares the best, since while there are some units that outshine him, like a Lexphi, there's also a ton of mixes that make terrible units, like a Do Lester. I considered Julia because of how awesome she is in the endgame. For most players, that's only going to be one fight. And there was also the factors that she's missing for Chapter 10 and all but the very end of endgame. Her performance in Chapter 6, even when she gets Nosferatu, is incredibly shaky. And the fact that she's not on a horse in the game titled, "Hey, you better be mounted, otherwise I hope you have a second screen to pass the time it takes to get from one castle to another." As for the worst, there are some arguments that Hannibal is worse, and while I get that, especially because there's nowhere near as many places for him to act as a wall, especially since there's more flying units in Gen 2 who can just go around him. Not only is he the perfect unit to slap onto the throne of Light and Dark to ensure Arian's battalion doesn't destroy your home base before Altina gets there, but without him, Charlo can't get his Berserk staff, which are reason enough to just place him a bit above Corpray. I legit got like one comment talking about my replacement picks. I don't think much needs to be said here. I think for once I just had correct opinions. Or no one has ever used the replacement units and thus cannot argue with me. Now this one raised some people's temperatures, so I'm gonna start by defending my worst, because some people thought that Wendy, or as she's now known as, Gwendolyn, is worse. And while she is bad, there are some pros that put her above Sophia. A lot of people brought up that Wendy joins right before the game throws a bunch of axe units at you. To which I respond by saying, 3 chapters later, you get an Axe Reaver, which reverses the weapon triangle to give her an advantage over them. And if you can make it over the finish line, Wendy has some juicy promo gains, like more con and speed to avoid getting doubled, so while she's not fantastic, it's better in my opinion than Sophia, because dark magic in this game kind of sucks. Dark magic is incredibly heavy in this game, which makes Sophia's 3 constitution terrible, because if she's wielding Flux, the lightest dark magic tome in the game, she loses 2 points of speed, a stat she's hurting for. And it only gets worse from there, as the tomes get heavier and heavier, and her speed just can't keep up. Some people suggested that Sonya has cleric benefits, where if you level her up 9 times, you can get a cleric unit. And to that I say, technically? If I understand the mechanics of Binding Blade correctly, Sophia starts with an E rank in staves, meaning she'll have to use heal 100 times before she gets access to Mend and Torch, and then another 100 times before getting access to staves people actually give a crap about. Not only can her role be better filled by units like Clarice, Cecilia, heck, even Ellen with the base magic of 1, at least joins 12 chapters earlier for more training time. And if you promote Lou or Lilina, then they can do it better too. They're both trash, some of the worst the series has to offer, but Gwendolyn just barely ekes out ahead in my opinion. As for the best, this was also controversial. A lot of people called me out for saying Deke was better than Percival, or Melody, or even Rutger or Shanna, so I will once again state that this is my opinion for the best in normal mode. For those unaware, Binding Blade was the first game to have a selectable difficulty mode. Technically. Gaiden had an optional secret mode that doubled your XP gain and made it so Alm and Celicus shared a convoy, and Genealogy had an option you unlocked after beating the game called Clever Mode, which made it so the AI would always attack the most optimal target they could. But what we think of when it comes to difficulty, Binding Blade was the first. And to make it more difficult, they added a bunch of stats to the enemies depending on how far you were into the game, with the early game giving out 8 extra points to enemy units, while the last few chapters give plus 15. But you see, they added these stats to the recruitable units as well. Rutger's stats on normal mode are respectable, but on hard, they're all 1 to 3 points higher depending on what you rolled, and as you can imagine, a unit going from 13 speed to 16 speed can be incredible. This is why you see Melody and Percival so highly ranked on tier lists, because of these points. Melody can gain a potential 6 points to strength, 3 defense, and 4 speed, which is pretty awesome for a Wyvern Knight, and Percival gets 2 to 4 points in most of his stats, except he gets potentially 9 points of HP, so that's why they're so often called the best in the game. Except that's something I've never experienced, cause I've never played Binding Blade hard mode. I beat Binding Blade a few years back, had an okay time, but didn't want to go back to play hard mode, so I never experienced these massive stat buffs. As such, I had to go off of wikis, comparing stats, and my own personal playthrough, and from that data, I believed Deke was the best unit, since he's pretty hard to ruin, has access to swords and axes, which is a good spread of weapons, and since he joins in Chapter 2, compared to Chapter 12, 13, or 15, he has plenty of time to min-max his stats. I still think that he's absolutely amazing, and I think that he's the best in normal mode. I can attest that maybe the changes in hard mode make someone else the better unit. This is gonna hurt to admit, but you know how some people said I faked this list just to be different and quirky? Well, to be honest, that's not true. Outside of these next 3 games, I'll admit it, I didn't want the early game Paladin to win 3 times in a row. I thought it'd be boring and overplayed, so I picked units that I thought were almost as good, but would spark more discussion. I admit, I'm sorry for just saying things that were kind of objectively wrong. So yes, Marcus and Titania should have won. The only reason I put Seth in was because even I knew I couldn't get away with saying someone else was better. I wanted to highlight units I thought were underrated and similar enough to the best that they could slip by. The rest of my list was made in earnest, but for those 2 picks, I did phone it in, and for that I apologize. And I hope this information doesn't ruin the rest of the list. Oh yeah, I forgot, Blazing Blade is on fire because I said Lynn was the worst unit, huh? Crazy thing is, I stand by it. Yes, she's very fast. Yes, there are units who perform worse than her. Both the archers have terrible damage output, especially in the English release because they lowered the effective damage, and don't even get me started on Carla, but no one's lost an Iron Man to Carla. Right out the gate, she either ties or loses out to Guy in every single stat, which only gets worse if you play Hector hard mode. Their growths are about on par with each other, unless you want to count plus 10 higher strength and 5% higher defense as wins for her, and sure, she gets the Kadi blades. But while the Manicotti is good, the Solkadi is considered one of the worst personal weapons in all of Fire Emblem, because it weighs down this Swordmaster by 8. Plus, she's force deployed to light, meaning she's going to be in danger of all of these powerful dudes, and most importantly, the dragon. It has 1 to 3 range, so she can't attack it without taking between 37 and 40 points of damage in return. Something she can barely do once, and definitely can't do twice. And even if you look at her whole game performance, from experience, this game is mostly filled with lances, so she's less likely to dodge and thus die. And I get it, some of the problems can be fixed with playing Lyn mode. Here's the thing though, most of the people I see talk about Fire Emblem, from Let's Players to people on Reddit to even people on Twitter, they skip Lyn mode because it's boring and handholdy, and outside of promoting Kent or the green one, doesn't have much value and can even lower the value of the gem you get when Lyn joins back up with you. Blazing Blade has some trash units, okay? Will is the poster boy for crappy archers. Wallace is best used to give Kent or the green one a promotion item, making him terrible when he rejoins a whole bunch of chapters later. Corel is more fan service than serviceable, and Nino is... well, she's there, but you know how you can fix them? Undeploy them. None of them are force deployed, or given weapons the game tells you to use that suck by design. If we were taking them out of context, yeah, Carla is worse. She's terrible. I never said she wasn't. Me going in the comments and saying she has a 100% crit rate because I used her once and she crit wasn't an actual defense like I saw some people say. But this is not Twitter, people. Context matters. And in the context of a sword-locked infantry unit who spends most of the game falling behind other units who promote anywhere from 8 to 16 chapters earlier, counting bonus chapters with her only redeeming stat being speed, and even upon promoting she gains access to the worst physical weapon type in the game and is forced deployed to the hardest chapters in the game, requiring either heavy babying or the early game to train her into a unit that can probably survive the heavy enemies, or heavy babying in the hardest chapters in the game to make sure she stays out of range of the enemies who also run as dead. Carla's not the worst unit. Seth was the obvious pick for this one, but a few people defended Iwan for a number of reasons, and offered up units that were worse. Some people said Cyrene is worse because she joins 3 chapters before the 2-part endgame is bad, but like, she's a flyer? They're always at least decent? She's not fantastic, but she can do a decent enough job, and if nothing else, can rescue drop units in the late game to get units where they need to be. And at the very least, can take 1 hit in her join chapter, which Iwan can't. Iwan's only defendable point is Summoner, which requires 9 levels of Pupil, a complete reset, and then 9 more levels of Dark Mage, which sounds terrible. His bases are abysmal, and while his growths are okay, do you want to level a unit with base 3 magic, 40% growth, in a chapter where most enemies have hand axes or javelins? Do you want to watch as all the anima training you did goes down the drain as he needs to reset back to E rank dark magic? Plus, Summoner is just okay, since while they give you infinite units, they only have 1 HP and terrible evasion, so they can't really act as a dodge tank, and since they have 0 defense or resistance, they're guaranteed to die, and you can only have 1 active at a time. If you need a Summoner, just wait 2 to 3 chapters and you'll get Noel, who is a level 10 shaman with a master seal right in his inventory. Instant Summoner. Iwan does nothing good, and before he can even get his niche, because there is no way you're getting him through both Pupil and 10 levels of Dark Mage in 2 to 3 chapters, unless you basically feed him every single unit, a better version of him joins. And some people will say that Iwan will have better stats when he becomes a Summoner than Noel, but here's the thing. Most people only like Summoners for their summons, which don't require their stats. So you can't say that Summoner is good only because of its ability to summon, and also say that Iwan is better because of his stats, which don't really come into play. Again, Titania is the best unit, not much I can argue about that, but there is some contention with Soth, mostly stating that he's not the worst, and that there are a few units he's above, namely Rolf, Lucia, and one that I myself have realized is terrible. But let's take a look at some of Soth's defenders' points. For starters, he's a backup thief, meaning if you don't recruit Volk or he dies, you can use Soth instead to pick locks, which is true, though I think Path of Radiance does a pretty good job of supplying you with chest keys as backups, and you can just attack doors to unlock them, so Soth stinks. But what about the other characters people think are worse? The main ones I saw were Rolf and Lucia. Rolf for being a crappy archer in a game that hates archers, and Lucia for being an incredibly weak sword user in a game that hates units who only use swords. Though personally there is one unit I think is worse because at the very least you have time to train Rolf. You get him relatively early, and Lucia can remove parity, learn Astra, and become a much better killing machine, since yeah, her strength isn't amazing, but getting hit 5 times by a unit is gonna do damage. But Naysala? Ooh, no, he just sucks. During the final map, you're given a choice between Tabarn, Naysala, and Gifika, and Naysala is the worst option. He can only deal 4 damage twice, versus Tabarn's 10 and Gifika's 15. Plus, the others have additional advantages, like Gifika being able to tank 2 hits just fine from Ashnard, and Tabarn having a 36% chance to cancel Ashnard's attack, letting him get free hits in. Even Naysala himself knows he's the worst pick, because if you pick him, unlike Gifika or Tabarn, who will tell you they're here to stop the Daeans from giving you trouble, or promising that King Daean will fall by his hands, Naysala tells you to not put the burden of this battle on him. What a tool. Alright Alright, this one's gonna be a bit of a doozy, so buckle up. Horror's pretty much fine, no one really had a complaint about that, but as for my list of bad takes, just about every single one of my picks were trashed in one way or another. Outside of I think Edward wasn't defended, but that's about it. And considering how cooked I was being, I decided that it was time to replay Radiant Dawn, and have my opinions changed quite a bit. Micaiah is no longer the worst unit, and I apologize for her slander. While it is true that she is a pretty subpar unit, you can make her into a decent glass cannon, and with some luck, stat boosters, and Bexp, she can get some pretty respectable stats. And if nothing else, she's a free physic user, since when she promotes, she gains C rank staves. Her part 1 performance is still terrible, one of the worst units in her part, and 1-9 is still my least favorite chapter in Fire Emblem, but in my opinion, who is worst now? There's still plenty to pick from, and the worst in my opinion is Liar. My reasoning for putting her above Micaiah at first was, admittedly, from a playthrough of mine where I grinded out her weapon level by having Heather steal the weapon of a armor unit in 3-4 to get her a stronger weapon. And though she performed fine, but I understand that is subjective and not something the average person would do. The only reason I was able to figure this out is by going back and checking my actual save file where I saw her with SS rank strike, which, interesting choice me. In general, she is terrible, and the only reason I think I did that in the first place was to make sure that Zehark had his Lagoo's girlfriend back. I did have some bad bias against Micaiah because in my last Radiant Dawn playthrough, I just had terrible luck with keeping her alive. And since my speed was even worse then than now, any unit that isn't a mage could two-shot her, so I will admit, my anger got the best of me. Still, she's not fantastic. I've been doing my best to make her usable, and even still, she's just kind of okay. Let's talk about the worst first, Navarre. Now for starters, why in the world did I call this guy better than Navarre? For a few reasons. And also aura. The reasons being he actually has a defensive growth which can be carried into other classes, better strength, only slightly worse speed, and 2 more levels he can gain. But here's the real reason. Rad has always been underwhelming. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, Mystery of the Emblem Book 1, he's kind of just fine. A filler unit, and he's got decent growths, but fine. Navarre, meanwhile, is a beast, especially in Mystery of the Emblem Book 2. He's a crit dealing machine, but the mechanics of Shadow Dragon completely and utterly ruin Navarre, and so while Rad is still affected by all this, he just goes from to bad. But when Navarre goes from powerhouse to bad, it's so much more of a painful fall. Yeah, Rad should probably take the bottom spot of worst of the worst, but Navarre is more personally insulting, if that makes sense. As for the best, this one was a bit more controversial, as some people believe that while Wolf and Sedgar are snowballs, no one denied that, they believe that some other characters would be better out of the box, and were more useful than those two could be. The one brought forward was Sita, Marth's darling wife, and to be fair, I think that Sita is amazing, and might be the best, if there wasn't a fantastic place to train the two into killing machines. Pretty early on, actually. The chapter after they join has a shop where you can buy infinite javelins, and then 2 chapters later is Port Warren. Port Warren sees you under assault by a ton of cavaliers, knights, archers, and horsemen. But even assuming they haven't gained a single point in defense, most enemies cannot deal more than 3 damage to them. And so by giving them vulneraries and javelins, or warping them onto these forts, you can not only give you time to buy, sell, an arena down here, but you can feed all the units to Wolf and Sedgar, who will soon start taking no damage, and can then consume the lives of every single enemy in sight for even better growths. Granted, if you don't do this, I can see why it might seem too tedious to train them, but this can make them into ultimate generalists. I even did this once on a playthrough on hard too, so it's not even something that only works on like normal or hard. Also, some people claim that once enemies start hitting res, their tankiness starts fading away. But from my multiple playthroughs, there's never enough mages that it's a major threat. The two have massive HP pools and pretty good speed, so it's unlikely that they're gonna get doubled, and even if I'm misremembering, the clerics in your army gaining dust or something? Why aren't they healing them? Like I said, Wolf and Sedgar are only better if you do the Port Warren training arc, or some kind of similar training thing to get them a lot of levels, but it's pretty free, only requiring assuming you need to buy everything, 6.6k gold, and 2 uses of warp to get near perfect units. I don't even think that this is all that much like the Lyre thing, but if you don't want to do that, Seed is better, thanks to her ability to wield lances, and thus lances like the Rider's Bane or her Wing Spear to instantly eliminate an enemy unit, and her ability to wield axes once she promotes means that she can start wielding hammers eventually, which allows you to take out the scary armor units. I still think that Wolf and Sedgar are better if you take the time into it, but hey, that's just my opinion. So there was a bit of a dispute here when it came to my worst pick, but honestly, it's really funny because I forgot this character even existed. Valentia was presented to me as worse than Ubello, and I kinda gotta agree, because at the very least, if you put the work into Ubello, you can get a decent mage. A 50% magic growth means that he's pretty likely to gain magic, and he's got the same speed growth, so he's got something. But Bantu, God, this is terrible. He's way worse. Like, way worse. He's always had terrible growths, as early as Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but the way Dragonstones work means that it's still useful to use Bantu because he's a incredibly tanky damage sponge that doesn't kill enemies in retaliation, being perfect to set up kills for your weaker units. And Mystery of the Emblem had incredibly powerful dragon forms, so you could excuse his terrible stats with 20 free damage, more or less depending on whatever dragon he shifted into. But now that dragons actually do a math calculation for their damage, this just isn't excusable. His stats are terrible. Some people claim that Frederick takes the crown from Robin due to being essential in lunatic playthroughs, but this doesn't really apply to hard and normal, and he does start slowing down. And Robin, meanwhile, once he gets going, goes and never stops. As for Rickon being the worst, it mostly comes down to if you're willing to dig in your teeth and do a bit of grinding. Donald's base class, the Villager, just sucks, straight up. But if you do some training with him and get him into Merc, you can easily get a unit who can run through entire chapters with just glass weapons. Since his luck is so stupidly high, Arms Thrift can keep his weapons from breaking. Plus, he can level pretty easily thanks to the Arms Scroll in Paralog 4, and then he can wield javelins for easy levels. If you're not interested in grinding, or maybe on Lunatic, that's not worth it, but difficulty can change things so much, I'd probably have to give each difficulty a different best unit, and being honest, I don't want to do that. I think that Rickon is a little worse than Donald overall, but I can definitely see why some people wouldn't want to invest all that time into him. But what you may not have noticed is that I didn't include a single 2nd gen unit in this or Fates. And that's because they're all fine. They're all good, have great growths and bases, skills, and outside of Brady, literally all of them can be deployed right out the gate and be useful. Heck, in Fates, they get seals in their starting inventory to make them work better right out the gate. Honestly, I didn't cover them because they were just not interesting to talk about, and while I could look at the worst versions possible, like a Brady with a Vake parent or something, that sounded like too much work. I'm lazy, sue me. There was some contesting Izana's placement, as he's a pretty good rally bot and has some good base magic and staff rank, and that a worst unit is Setsuna, and to be honest, it's kind of up in the air really. Birthright is a very enemy phase game, but Setsuna has the ability of, right off the bat, being able to take out those pesky Wyvern Riders. But more attention was drawn towards a unit in every route who struggles, Mozu. I'm going to talk about her here because I do think, having done some research, she is the worst, but something I should say is that when it comes to the 3DS games, worst unit is basically a B tier in any other game. Wendy wishes she had access to second seals. Lyra would beg on her hands and knees for infinite grinding through bonus maps or DLC, and E1 would kill to get access to the ability to pair up and gain stats. So with that said, why is Mozu the worst unit, more than Izana? Well, her bases are terrible across the board, as one would expect from a villager, but her growths aren't that fantastic? Aptitude helps, of course, but more problematic than that are her class options. Her only reclass option, without an A rank or S rank, is Archer, a pretty mid class, and while Sniper is pretty good, Kinshi Knight is just alright, and her own promotion options are, once again, shaky. Master of Arms can fix her damage issue, albeit at the cost of being even more frail, and Merchant, which can be used to gain gold, but its power is limited because you're supposed to use those gold bars you gain not to sell for money, which you don't need in Birthright, but instead to be destroyed for a one-time gain of plus 10 damage dealt, minus 10 damage received. And that sucks. Also doesn't really fit anywhere, and it can be hard to train her, but again, only hard by modern standards. This isn't no Hermina situation. Alright, another one I got roasted for, but to be fair, most of the comments saying that Odin is the best mentioned that the opinion change was kind of recent. There's a sort of expensive, depending on when you do this, item-intensive way to make Odin an A-tier character, or potentially even S-tier, by using a second seal to make him a samurai, getting him to level 10 so he can learn Vantage, and then going back to Dark Mage so he can be a fairly effective Nosferatu tank, since he's always gaining HP back, and if he's under 50% HP, he attacks first, which can then allow him to regain health back up. Since he's the only person who can do this in Conquest. There are a few characters who can do it in Revelations, depending on marriages and stuff like that, but for the most part, Odin is going to be the one who does this. Now when it comes to the worst, I could pick Mozu again, but I think she has a bit more value in Conquest, literally, due to being able to generate money, something that Conquest is always in desperate need of. So who is the worst? I considered putting Nyx here, but her personal skill, being a Dark Mage in general, and being a near perfect partner to Odin, make me not want to put her here. So instead, I nominate Benny as the worst. Just as Birthright was a game built around enemy phase, Conquest is one built around player phase, and a slow knight whose only real boon is his strength and defense really lags behind the rest of the army. Knight is a mid-class, and he can't even really fix it with reclasses, because his friendship seal options in Conquest are both for fighter, something he already has access to, and really doesn't get much out of it. He might be able to get something out of one of his potential wife's classes, but that's quite a lot of investment in a game where investment is hard to come by. If you need a tank, which you don't really need, there are much better options to get punched in the face, like Xander, Camilla, or heck, 6 chapters earlier you get Effie, which means 6 extra chapters of leveling and working to make her not suck. Again, no real complaints, meaning I can move on, right? Right? Alright, time to address the elephant in the room. Why in the world were none of my best picks Corrin? Chris and Robin are both nominated, so why isn't Corrin? Well, for one simple reason. Corrin struggles to do everything. Not that he struggles to do everything, but he struggles to do everything, if that makes any sense. At any point in Awakening, I can give Robin a second seal, and I now have an amazing unit in whatever class I put him in. Bam! I got a Berserker for incredible axe damage. Bam! I got a Falcon Knight for a mobile cleric to heal my units. Bam! I've got a General to hold the point. Same thing for Chris. But when it comes to Corrin, the game around him prevents him from doing this, as he only has access to 2 classes, 4 at max with an S rank and an A rank, assuming they're not classes he or she already selected at the beginning of the game, so he's a bit more restricted in what he can do. Also, even when I pick a speed build for him, I always have trouble getting Corrin to double, but that might just be how I built him. Not a whole lot of argument here, which is really funny since my pick for best was a bow. The only real thing that some people said is Alm is better, but since Alm can wield the bow, that means he's not as good as... Okay, I should probably give a real answer. And yeah, I do think that Alm is the best unit, thanks in part due to how insane his personal weapons are. The Royal Sword has Double Lion, which is just Hunter's Volley, but less range and more damage, and he has the incredibly powerful Send skill for obliterating problematic targets. And while the Falchion doesn't have Double Lion, it does have Send scale, and Deicide might be important, I don't know. As for the worst, most often it was given to Atlas, but I just don't agree. People complain that Atlas is a villager, when he can immediately promote into whatever class you need him to. I find it most useful to put him in Archer, but if we're comparing him to Jesse's performance, why not just put him in Mercenary and see what happens? Atlas beats him in strength and defense, is only a point or so behind him in speed, and let's be real here, is 3 points of resistance something that's going to matter much? It won't be too long until Atlas catches up to Jesse, while his skill is pretty bad, swords, and his class in general, make him accurate enough that it isn't really a problem. He's not much slower, and oh yeah, he's got 6 more points of strength on him. So if Jesse can double someone, Atlas most likely can as well, and also deal 12 more damage than Atlas. No way in heck Atlas can be seen as worse than Jesse. So this isn't the most enraging thing, it did get quite a bit of friction. For the best, this is one that I've kind of updated my thinking on. Yuri I put as the best, not only because most online FE talking spaces I was in called him pay to win, but looking at his stats and how Three Houses works, I kinda just accepted it. But I will concede he's got some flaws. His combat arts are pretty mid, as while Wind Sweep is good, he doesn't have much else in terms of good sword arts. And his spell list doesn't hit as hard as it should. I hesitate to put any of the house leaders as best because they're only available in a fourth of the playthroughs, because no matter how strong Raging Storm is, that doesn't really do much for you in Verdant Wind, and as much as people like to argue about what the most important stat is, really, it's availability. A unit that's available earlier in the game is most likely going to be infinitely better than a unit later in the game, just because you have time with them more. I suppose that the best character I'll pick is Lysithea, because yeah, she's not defensively tough, she's not going to hold any lines, but there's no better unit for obliterating an enemy. She can be effective against mounted, she can ignore enemy resistance, she can tank an enemy's speed, and if you have Lawrence as well, she can get the Thyrsus, which gives her 2 extra range and a 50% chance to have the damage coming in, making her much better at surviving. And even if for some reason you wanted to make her a physical class, her minor crest of Karen means she can use the Thunderbrand and its personal skill kind of effectively, and still make use of her magic stat thanks to her learning Soul Blade. As for the worst, this one was another that was a bit contested, as while Raph is pretty trash, he has access to the Brawler, Grappler, and War Master classes. Classes which are pretty good, so that does somewhat save him. Some other pretty trash characters are Flayn, who, while she has pretty good white magic, otherwise she's a terrible character, but I decided to give it to Anna after much consideration, because she's a fundamentally incomplete character. Why? Well, because she doesn't have supports. Not only does this mean her characterization is almost dead on arrival, but she doesn't get bonuses when near allies, meaning she's going to be hit more, miss more, plus her spell list is terrible outside of Meteor A rank and I guess Rescue at B, but her personal skill is dog water, because it just increases her luck by 5. Luck. By 5. Also, for those asking why Byleth isn't the best, that mostly just comes down to the fact that Byleth has a bit of an issue where they're what the game compares when you're recruiting a character, so you're going to become a very wide generalist, which means you're not as specialized as some of the other units. Now, you may think that, well, why would I try recruiting characters? Maybe I don't care too much about recruiting units. Maybe I just want to play the game normally and see how it goes. But, like, that's going to really limit you and isn't really recommended to do in Maddening, and even somewhat on hard mode. That's mostly due to the fact that no matter what house you pick, you're going to be missing someone. If you don't pick Blue Lions, you're going to miss out on one of the best units in the game, Felix, and his incredibly fast sword hand. You're also going to miss out on Mercedes, who is basically the only healer you're ever going to need due to getting both Physic and Fortify. If you don't go Golden Deer, you're going to miss out on Lysithea, who I think is the best unit in the game due to her ability to obliterate just about any unit in the game. You're going to miss out on Hilda, who is a insanely powerful physical damage dealer. And if you don't pick Black Eagles, you're going to miss out on Linhardt, who has Warp and Restore, both very, very useful white magic spells. And you're also going to miss out on Petra, who may have the highest crit rate in the entire game. So no matter what route you go down, you're definitely going to do some spreading out, and that's going to mean that Byleth isn't going to be as focused as the rest of the units. They're still really good, and female Byleth I think is better than male just because they have access to flying earlier, but it should be noted that they're not the best unit. Alright, I'll just be honest, I think I'm being gaslit here, because everyone says my take for Evander is wrong, but most people don't even say why. They said that he's the best chipper, and one guy even said he was the 3rd best unit you get before Ivy, but like, no, from personal experience and everything I've checked, no he's not. For those who did give explanations, I can literally debunk them on a hard difficulty. As early as Chapter 4, he's getting doubled by enemies who can break him, and while I understand most of the fandom loves bases more than growths, it's not looking too good for him in that regard either. Someone put a direct comparison between Boucheron and Vander's stats in their comment, and while there are some big losses like 11 HP, 4 defense, and 5 resistance, most of these stats are within 1 to 2 points. And you know what? Boucheron is actually going to be getting XP from his kills, meaning he'll be winning in the long term, and you know what? Outside of resistance and luck, Boucheron has better growths as well, sometimes beating him by 40 points. Now, I'm not claiming that Boucheron is an amazing unit, he's just kinda alright, but he's better than Vander. Another unit who was claimed to be worse was another unit who joins in Chapter 3, Alfred. Now, once again, Alfred is not great, but not only can he grow faster and better than Vander, but he has an advantage over Vander due to their weapons of choice. From my experience, when it comes to the divide between enemies, while it's mostly balanced, there tend to be more sword units than any others by a small margin, meaning while Alfred breaks them, Vander gets broken. And he gets the exact same bonuses from Vander would from the emblem rings. So like 7 movement with Sigurd, +1 movement with Roy, etc. These two completely invalidate Vander's few pros. Also, no one really had a gripe with Hortensia, so once again, I had a good take. So in general, I had about 12 takes for best that were good, and like 5 good takes when it came to the bad units. I don't have any like funny contest to do like last time or a ranking, so I guess I'll just say thanks for watching my videos. Like I said in both the best and the start of this one, the discussions that were had in the comments were relatively civil, and I think there was some interesting discussions going on, either between commenters or between me and people disagreeing with my takes. Just because some people got too heated over digital character rankings doesn't mean the entire thing was a disaster, and really that's kind of what the videos were made for, to get people talking about Fire Emblem. But hey, I gave some new opinions this time, so why don't we talk about it in the comments below? Did you think these were more agreeable? Did you think they might be misguided? Or were they so terrible you need to call me a fake fan to prove how wrong I am? I'll see you nerds in the comments below, and I hope to see you again.